Today I'm going to show you how to choose the best kick, or really any sound, for your song. But why listen to me? Well, my name is Bassclef and I've been a professional music producer since about 2004, and I've released hundreds of records on labels like Spinnin', Defected, Toolroom, Armada, and many more. I've had multiple #1 records on Beatport and toured in over 33 countries. I've released as Bassclef, Analog Soul, Tyson, and a bunch of other names. And back in 2016, I started my own online music production school to help people like you achieve your music production dreams. How would you like to never have to worry about your kick again? To find your best kick ever today and know that if it ever changes in future, it's only going to get better. Sounds pretty good, right? Because I can tell you the fastest way to destroy your mixdown is by using a bad kick drum. Something that's not properly tested in context, something that's not the right fit for your song. Now you don't want to do that. This is what uninformed beginners do. Now by making this mistake, your mix will sound terrible, weak, or overcooked. You'll waste loads of time trying to fix your kick. You'll also give your mix a bad anchor, which means you're going to tilt your mix and make bad decisions through your whole mixdown process. Choosing a bad kick drum is kind of like cooking with rotten fish. No one in their right mind would ever do that. No amount of salt or seasoning or the way you cook it is ever going to fix the fact that it's rotten fish. You wouldn't do that. You would check it first. It's just one of those things that is always important to check. Now here's the better way. We need to start spending more time making sure we pick the right kick. And trust me, there's millions of great ones out there between Splice, Loop Cloud, and the rest. Now this is going to help you save time, feel confident in your mixes, make your mix downs faster and easier, and you will nail your low end every time. It's quite likely you might have heard that choosing the right kick is important, but not many people have actually been shown the right way to choose the right kick. And this is what we're going to do here today. I'm going to show you a few examples of what not to do so you can make sure you're avoiding those. And then I'm going to show you exactly the right way you should be choosing a kick that's going to make it much easier for you. I'm also going to go through the characteristics of kick drums so you can understand what you should be looking for and what you should be listening to. And don't worry, all of these concepts apply to all genres. So real quick, let me show you what I think is the wrong way so that we can make sure you're not doing these things before we show you the right things. So the first one is picking a kick at the start, loading it in, and just leaving it there for the whole rest of your song and never considering or trying out if a different one would work better. Now the problem is when most people are starting out, they're throwing in a kick drum and it's the first thing on the screen. So they have nothing to compare it to. So any kick could be fine. But after you start writing the song and the parts start going in there, it starts to set some predefined conditions. We've got certain sounds that have to work, that have to exist. And now that we have those, there's no guarantee that that first kick is going to work well with these new sounds we put in there. Between your bass, your melodic parts, the rest of your drums, there's limitations now. It's kind of like if you had a puzzle that's almost finished, there's one piece left to go, only that right piece is going to fit there. So what makes you think that first kick you chose before you wrote it is the right one? It's definitely worth double checking once we have all the sounds in there. Second thing I want you to avoid is programming in audio. The reason why is if we program our kicks in audio like this, it's a little bit more difficult to switch them out and compare them and replace them with other kick drums. Sure, you could go to the audio file and you can say, change my audio file. But then you're going to need to have multiple tracks and each one with a different audio file all balanced on here. It just gets messy and you can't easily and quickly recall that back again to use in other projects in future. What I recommend you do instead is program them in MIDI and put them in a drum rack. We'll talk more about that soon. Next up, I recommend you don't layer your kick drums. There's many sonic problems that can come up from this and we're going to delve into that soon. But even just for the sheer fact that when you start layering kick drums, you're very much kind of committing to a kick drum. So when you don't like the sound of it, what you're going to end up doing is turning the top piece up and down or the mid piece up and down or something. But you very rarely, when people are doing this, I don't see them go back and compare against a whole new kick drum. They kind of get married to this multi-layered kick drum and they stop trying out other kick drum options. And the last kick drum mistake I want you to avoid is scrolling through a list of kick drums like this and doing that as a way to choose kicks. It's going to be impossible for anyone to choose the right kick drum for their song when they're not hearing it in context with the music and they're just scrolling through a folder like this. That tells you nothing. Okay, let's get into the right way. Here's what I recommend you do to choose the best kick drum for your song. The first thing I think we all need to do is know what we're aiming for. You need to choose some good reference tracks. If you don't have good reference tracks loaded up, how are you ever going to pick a good kick drum if you don't know what to compare it against? Now, I highly recommend this plugin because it does something very important. It will take all my reference tracks and it will automatically match the volume of them at LUFS. Now, this is crucial. There's a lot more that goes into referencing, but we're here to talk about kicks today. So this is the demo song we're going to use today. And here's some of the reference tracks. Look how quickly I can go between those and hear the difference, and all of that matched LUFS volume makes it much more clear and easy to tell the difference tonally and sonically between my kick drum and the kick drums I like in other people's songs. Now, it's very important that you make sure your reference tracks are obviously a good mixdown. Make sure they're a similar genre. Make sure the bass line is slightly similar to yours. If you have a short rhythmic bass line or if you have a long legato bass line, try to find ones that are kind of similar, because the kind of kick that's working well for them will probably work for you. Also, tempo is important. They should be roughly similar, usually within 5 to 10 BPM. Next tip, it is very important for you to test out your kick drums in a real world setting. I recommend you try them in one of your finished songs. Now, I'm using a demo here just for copyright purposes, but I've got a whole song playing. And I can audition my kicks and hear how it would sit with parts that are from my songs and are balanced. So load up one of your songs that you're most proud of on the mixdown, the one that you think sounds the best, and use that one to choose your kick drums. Because that way you're going to be able to tell how they would have worked in your song. Could have they been even better than the original kick that you finished that song with? Try and find ones that blow you away, that sit well. Because if they sit well in that song, they're probably going to sit well in your other songs. Now, as we're hearing them in your song, we're hearing them in context, but we're also switching between them in context. So we can compare how well did this one work in your song versus how well did the other one work. Now, I've got a bunch of them loaded up into a drum rack here in Ableton. You can do similar stuff in Logic and other programs too. You could go into the MIDI and just move the piece of MIDI up and down in here. But I like to use the MIDI pitch plugin here, because then I can just tap this up and down with the keyboard and stay on one screen and cycle through them. Let's try this out and hear a couple of kicks. So it makes it so easy to hear them in context, and those little subtleties stick out of, oh, you know what? That kick works a little better in this song than it did last time in the song I did last week. Or maybe I wouldn't have chosen that kick, but wow, it's really working in this song. It can surprise you, and you're not going to know unless you hear them in context in your song, compared in context in a real world environment. Hey, by the way, if you're enjoying these tips and finding them useful, then I got something really special I want to tell you about. I'm about to launch a brand new advanced mixdown course. It's coming up in October 2024, but it's very limited spaces. Only 10 people can come onto this because there's in-person group training along with the video training as well too. So if you want to unlock the pro sound of your dreams, head to bassclef.com/PSS or click the link below, and you can join the priority waitlist there to be first notified when we open enrollment. Next up, let's make sure the master bus is also a real world environment. So I'm running all of this through my usual limiter, the DMG Limitless, and I'm setting it to a kind of finished song level, around about -8 LUFS. That way it's going to give me a bit of a preview of how will this kick sound when it actually hits my final limiter, because it will soften it a little. It will make it a little more sustained. If you're not checking your stuff through a limiter like this, you might be unpleasantly surprised when you finally hear it being mastered. Now, right after that is my reference plugin, which we talked about before, and importantly, a mono plugin. Because we don't really need to care about anything to do with stereo when we're choosing kick drums. Really, most of the time they should be mono anyway. But I think importantly, it makes your reference tracks all mono as well. So as you're comparing them, you don't get thrown off by any differences in the stereo field. You can just focus on purely the sonics, the sound selection, the volume and EQ, the fundamentals. On this same topic, I think it's very important to have a good listening environment. Now, whether it's speakers or headphones, they ideally need to be accurate and go deep enough into the low ends. My speakers don't go deep enough, although I have a nicely treated room, but I do have a sub pack on my chair, which goes down to about 5 hertz. It's crazy. These things are awesome. A little hard to get because they're always sold out, but they're very good. Honestly, when I first saw them, I thought they might be a bit of a toy, but I was blown away, and I've been using them for the past 10, 12 years or so now. I actually prefer it to a normal subwoofer. It totally made me switch. I do really like working in headphones though too for the kind of pristine sound. These go super deep down to about 15 hertz or so, and I combine that with a bit of sound ID reference, and that flattens out the frequency response of my headphones. Actually, I use the same thing on my speakers as well too, so that my speakers and headphones sound the same. What I'm getting at though here is your listening environment is very important, and if you can't hear things clearly, again, you're going to be struggling to pick the right kick drum. Now, I understand not everybody has a perfect listening environment, so you might like this analyzer. I've been really liking this over the last year or so. This is Vision 4X, and let me show you. It's a spectrogram mostly, but it's very helpful for seeing what's happening in your low end. So very helpful for comparing kick drums, or at least for a visual assistant to go along with your ears. Now, this actually does have 4 sections here to measure stuff, but we're going to mostly focus on these just for the moment, especially on this one on the left, the brightly colored one. This is a spectrogram that shows us frequency over time. It's kind of done like a heat map, like a thermal thing. So like the hotter the color looks, the louder it is. So this is showing you a picture of the kick drum right here. That really shows up. The bass line you can see is a little bit quieter in the background like that. Let me change between a few kicks and then I'll show you what it looks like and you can get a vibe for this. So you can really see everything that's going on from the higher frequencies down into the lower ones, how much strength it has in the attack. You can see the length of it. You can see the pitch of it. You can see how much sustain it has. You can actually also see a lot of problems in kick drums as well too. So I find this super useful to see what's going on in the low end. I mean, actually with my listening environment, I don't really need it. My stuff sounds great here, luckily for me. But if I'm working on the couch, and I don't have my good headphones, or if I'm traveling, then this is ideal. And it's great for demonstrating to students as well too, what I'm hearing, maybe if they can't. So if your listening environment is not optimal, you may like some kind of spectrogram. I personally like this one. I mean, I haven't tried them all, but I like this one. Now, also, I think it's not a bad idea to be running a little bit of light sidechain as well too. So I've got my parts sidechained over here. You can hear the parts that are getting sidechained like this. Because that's what we're going to do in the finished song. That's how it's going to sound. We're going to have a little bit of your usual sidechain. And remember, you should be doing this in one of your actual projects of a finished song that you like. So this is all making it much more real world so that you can be sure that when you use this kick, it's going to actually work in your next song. Now, once you've got that all set up, let me show you how we're going to start picking out these kick drums. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to do it in MIDI, and we're going to put them into a drum rack, like I've got here. Just kick drums, not a drum kit. This way it's going to let us easily compare the kicks against each other like I was showing you before. Now there's one special principle that I don't think other people use enough, is we're going to set a limitation. This thing can actually hold, 128 kick drums, way too many kick drums. But I'm going to tell you this, I want you to put a maximum of 16 kick drums in here. Pretend your computer is in the 1980s and it has like 6 megabytes of RAM. So this way, we have to make decisions now. You can't put these decisions off for later, and I don't want you dealing with these when you're trying to write music later on. Who wants to scroll through thousands of kick drums when they're just trying to make some music? You should have some good ones ready to go, and 16 is plenty. I think you could easily write a couple of albums of music with 16 kick drums. So really, you might only need 4, but that's your limit, 16. You can put 16 kicks in here, work on one page. If you fill it up, and you want to try different kicks, here's the rule. You have to delete one of the other ones to take its place. And if you're going to delete something, you have to delete the weakest link. You have to delete the worst one. So we're only keeping the best one. And this is what I was talking about at the start. This is how we can guarantee that your kick drums from here, from right now, from today, will only ever get better. Let's never let you have a kick drum that falls behind again. It's just unnecessary. We should always be building upon the work that we put into music production. Music production takes kind of a long time already. So I'm always all about ways to make it faster and easier for you to achieve more in less time, but still get great results. So like I said, you can switch between them using the MIDI pitch plugin. Or you can come in and do it in the clip here as well. Sometimes this is fiddly though if you have a whole bunch of separate MIDI clips. That's why I kind of like the pitch plugin way. Now as you try them out, it's important to be brutal. Every kick you try is either a hell yeah or a hell no. Either you love it and you're really excited about it, then you keep it. Or if it's anything less than that, delete. Because like I said, you don't need that many kicks, so just keep the good ones. Now, where do you get these kick drums from? Maybe you have some folders on your computer already and you can just start dragging in some sounds. Initially, just pull in what feels kind of right. We just need a starting point and we're going to improve from there. You're going to keep playing that game of deleting the weakest links, and when you've got more empty spaces, you're going to pull in more contenders that sound good to you and let them compete against each other and only keep the good ones. You can also find loads of kick drums on things like Loop Cloud and Splice. Let me show you a way we can do this as well too. Often I'll do this as kind of a first round in my kick drum competition. I've got over here a MIDI clip running to Loop Cloud Sounds, which I really like because it's just one plugin like this, and I've just typed in one shot kick and house, and we've got some sound there. So the MIDI will trigger it, and I can flick through these kick drums here before I've even purchased them. And that's kind of like the same kind of system in a way, except we can't keep track of it and build upon it. But it's good for the first round, so we can start to get a few ideas of like, maybe we heard a certain kick and went, oh, I really like that one or something, right? So then you can just come over, grab that one, drag it out and drop it into your drum rack. Or you could, sometimes I'll put a heart on there so I remember, and then I'll come back and download that one afterwards. But this would be my first round to dig out a couple, or I'll pull them out of some folders somewhere as well too. If I need to go into more detail, the full Loop Cloud application lets you filter stuff even better. And then I'm going to end up at that point where I have my sort of top picks going into my drum rack for my sort of semi-finals. Next important thing is that all my kicks need to be at basically the same volume. If you flick between different kicks and some are louder or quieter, you're just going to think the loud ones are awesome because that's the way our ears work. And if the quiet ones, you're probably going to think, meh. So we need to match them. So here's how you're going to do that. You're going to jump into the kick drum and go to the simpler, and over here on the volume control here, set the volume there, not outside on the fader. We want to keep everything as a per pad kind of setting like this. That way I can flick between them and they all have an equal chance at being a contender. Now, if you want to get really precise, you could load up a meter like this, Ulean loudness meter. They have a free version, it's very good, and it's going to let you measure the volume of each one and make them exactly the same. I recommend doing this in LUFS, by the way. Don't ever measure volume for things like this in Peak. Peak is a volume measurement for computers to understand, and just to make sure things aren't clipping in a digital world. But the way we hear things as humans is much closer to LUFS. So I have everything in here set to about, I think, minus 18.2 right now. So when I flick between them, the volumes are basically the same. Occasionally, you might still want to adjust that. You might feel that it probably should be up or down a dB, and that's totally fine. I always think it's more important to trust your ears. Now, you're probably wondering, what should you be listening for? What are the key elements and characteristics that are going to make up kick drums to help you decide what's the right one for you? And what is getting you closer to your reference tracks? So let's take a look at some kick drum examples that I've prepared earlier over here. The first characteristic I think to consider is pitch. Is it a high-pitch kick drum, a low-pitch kick drum? And is it roughly the kind of pitch that your reference tracks are doing? I mean, we could have kicks up this high or down as low as this, and there's a huge difference between. And if we pull up an analyzer like Vision, we can take a look at that too. Here's that high kick, and here's that low kick. So you can see the lower pitch, the sustain of it coming through here, with the other ones living quite a bit higher up here. So what pitch do you want your kick to live in? Well, let's go back to the example one I was working on in the demo, and let's compare it to some reference tracks. Let's pull that up over here. So these are coming through really similar. The center point of it is around about, what are we getting there? About 48 hertz. And I would say for most people doing house kind of stuff, I'd say the sweet spot for the thump and tone of your kick is often around about 50 hertz. You might go as low as maybe 45, as high as maybe 55. Check your reference tracks. That's the best way to know for what's working for your particular genre and style of music. What you don't need to do, you often hear people talk way too much about tuning kicks to the key of your song. Like 95% of the time, this is not necessary. If you have a super tonal kick drum, maybe. Let's pull up an example of that over here. I'll show you what I mean. Like this one has a tonal note. You can clearly hear the do. There's a note in there. But so many other kicks are just a thump. I don't know if like this. They're just a thump and an impact because there's a pitch bend to a kick and it happens so quickly, it takes away the audible kind of tone of it. I think people are most often getting hung up about this because they're looking at analyzers and they're looking at a certain sub frequency and deciding, well, I can see a big spike there, so it must be that note. But our ears aren't perceiving it that way. If you can't hear a problem, if you can't clearly hear a problem, then the kick's probably fine. Now, if the kick happens to be close to the key you want it to be in, sure, you could test it, but what I want you to be cautious of is don't drastically move the kick up and down to try and make it in key with a song to the detriment of your kick. Like I often see students put their kick up way too high and they take all the low end out of it and they ruin the punch. They make it too punchy and hard hitting. Or they pitch it down too low and make it all soft and too subby. In general, for most kicks, like I said, they're percussive and they're an impact. And it's much more important what frequency that impact is at, around that 50 hertz, than it is about what so-called key it's in. So yeah, unless you have a really clear tone or note to it, then just worry more about the impact. Check where your reference tracks are hitting and go for the same. But yeah, I like 50 hertz. Side tip for slightly different genres, things like drum and bass, you're probably going to have your kick quite a bit higher up because you're going to have your sub bass living underneath that. So like I was saying, it is very genre specific. Oh, and keep in mind, as you pitch it up, obviously it speeds the sample up. So the speed of the pitch bend changes as well too. So it's actually going to sound punchier the more you pitch it up. And as you pitch it down, the speed of the pitch bend gets slower. So it's going to sound softer in the attack on the way down. This can be a hack sometimes if you find your kick sample is a little too punchy or a little too soft. You can pitch it up and down. Sometimes you might need both of those things. Maybe your kick is too subby and too soft. Maybe the answer is just to pitch it up a little bit. Next main characteristic of kick drums would be the length. So we kind of touched on that, but look how short this one is versus this longer one. What other kind of lengths have we got? That one's super long. Pretty medium, kind of long, very short. So this will totally affect the perceived low end of your kick drum. You might have sometimes where you're trying to boost the low end in your kick drum and it just never seems to sound big enough. Sometimes this is because your kick drum is too short. It's just not ringing out far enough. Now, what kind of length do I recommend? Well, if it's some kind of house type stuff, if it's maybe melodic house and techno or Afro house or anything like this, you might want to kick even as long as an eighth note. So that's half the length until the next kick, if they're on all the quarter notes. And of course, I have a hack for this over here. So what I've done is I've taken all my MIDI and I've got it on set to an eighth note. You could also do this with a MIDI note length plugin. We could load this up here and we can set it to tempo sync and change the speed to be eighth notes. And then that way, this will force any MIDI to become eighth notes. This is kind of useful if you've got an old session and you've accidentally put all different lengths in. Sometimes they're 16s, sometimes they're whatever else. This will force everything on the track to just be eighth notes. Then you'd still need to do one more thing, and that's come into the patches, the simplers inside of your rack, and set them all to classic mode, because classic mode unlocks the ADSR envelope. And that means when you press play on the MIDI note, the sample will only play for as long as the MIDI note is. Well, it'll respond to it really. By default, sometimes the release knob is up really high like this, and that will make it ring out longer. But if you drop it down to something like, I usually put in about 90 milliseconds or so, that gives you the ability for it to chop off when the MIDI note stops with a little fade out, just enough so it doesn't make a click or something like that. There's also added benefits to having the ADSR that I talked about in my last video. Next characteristic is pitch bend. Like I mentioned, a lot of kicks, the fundamental structure behind them is we're taking a note and we're pitching it down really fast into the low end. And that speed can change. Let's have a look at what this kick looks like. Look at the angle there, that kind of diagonal that's coming down there. That's the speed of the pitch bend as it comes from a higher note down to a lower one. Let's compare that with something with a faster pitch bend. So there you go, there's the slower one, slightly faster. Some you'll see it almost go straight down like that, almost immediately. Now, you'll start to hear this, the more you notice this as well too. You'll start to hear that pitch bend. It can sound a little bit almost like when you gulp, almost kind of 200 hertz kind of vibe. And if that's what you need in your song, great. But a lot of people don't. So this will help you identify, do I want that kind of gulpy 200 hertz sound in the pitch bend of my kick drum, or do I want a more immediate fast pitch bend? Next main characteristic is the tone. And this is pretty obvious, but it's covering things like the EQ of your sounds, the EQ color, how much treble, mid-range, and bass does it have. So listen out for this as a quality too. Does your kick have enough bass? Does it have enough mids, enough treble? Or sometimes there's a treble spot, and this one is a good tip. It's the knockiness of your kick drum. and it usually lives around 500 to 700 hertz. Let me show you what this sounds like. So if you hear this in a kick drum, you can decide if you still want to use it or not, or a quick fix to repair it. So here's a kick that I would say is a little bit knocky. And I'll show you the frequency I'm talking about, around about 500 or so. Let's boost this up and have a listen. Imagine it's kind of like the sound of knocking on a wooden door, kind of that kind of tonality. Let me cut this and hear the difference. So that's what we're taking away. I'll put it back to normal and cut it again. It kind of makes the kick feel a little deeper. Not every kick needs this cut, but you might notice some kicks that have an excess around about 500 to 700. They have that sort of knocky, almost boxy quality to them. So something to think about when you're considering the tone of your kick. Next important characteristic, punch and attack. Some people get very obsessed with having a punchy kick drum, but I want to let you know that punch isn't everything. It's just a variable, a characteristic, and it's absolutely possible to have too much. So I want you to listen for what a punchy and soft kick sounds like, just to hear the difference, and then listen to your reference tracks and ask yourself, how punchy are they? How hard are they? Or are they softer? Because getting the right kind of punch and attack for your song makes a big difference. So here's an example of a punchy kick. Here's an example of a softer one. Could be even softer, really. But you really hear that impact at the start of it, that kind of whack. This one's punchy and hard in a different way, sort of bitey, with a lot of top end. And here again, that softer one. So often the soft ones can have a deeper sort of feeling to them. Sometimes a good way to decide is thinking about the intensity of your song. If your song is a bit more chill, it probably doesn't need a punchy kick. It probably needs something a little softer. If your song is more intense and hard hitting, like aggressive, yeah, maybe it does need a hard kind of kick drum to work with the other sounds that are in the mixdown. Now, if you do this the wrong way around and you put a kick that's too hard, punchy, or knocky into a song that should be soft and beautiful, oh, it's going to stick out in horrible ways. And a great way to spot that is listening to your song at a low volume and listen to that click of it, that impact and punch, and compare it to your reference tracks and ask yourself, is it too punchy? Because it might be. Remember, punch isn't everything. You just want the right amount of punch. Next important characteristic is volume envelope. Let's come and show this on this sound over here. When I say volume envelope, I'm meaning how does the volume change over time? What is the shape of the volume of the kick? As in, we kind of covered the attack and the punch a little bit, although the punch one often is to do with the intensity of the pitch envelope. But here we're talking about the volume envelope. And we can actually edit it. If we come into classic mode, we can use our ADSR is our volume envelope over here. And this is just something else to listen for in your kick and ask yourself, does it have the kind of shape you want? For example, if we play this one and we start taking some of the attack away, I'll put this in a visual mode. That's really removing the attack from the kick drum there. So you want to make sure, be listening out for that. Am I getting the right amount of attack? We could pull the release down. Make it a little shorter like that. Does your song need that kind of length, or does it need to ring out? Is it some kind of droney techno thing? We could pull the sustain down. And that's going to sound, well, like a kick with not much sustain. I think I saved one here too, like this. This is just how that one comes. Naturally, not that much sustain in there. So as you're comparing the kicks, listen out for, does the volume envelope match with what you're looking for? Next up, the density or character of the kick. You can have kicks that are really clean and kind of dirty, or with a lot of sort of character to them, a lot of complexity. I think this is an important thing to consider, because sometimes kicks, when they're too clean with not enough character, they just don't cut through in your mix. Let me give you an example. This is what I would call a very clean kick drum. You can hear and see too, it's very defined. There's not that much complexity to the sound. There's sort of a pop and a deep thump. This is what you usually get out of a kick drum synthesizer. Now, when it's got some other processing or samples or other things built into it, you might get a bit more crunch, a bit more dirty grittiness. Let's hear some examples. This is a dirtier kick drum. Now, sure, the other one has less low end and stuff. Don't worry about that for now. Just think of the character, the crunch of it. The other one's really clean, almost sine wave. It's kind of like a sine wave versus a busier wave, like a whole bunch of saws or whatever, right? Here's a more gritty kick. And the clean one? Difference there, right? This is another characteristic I would also look out for and thinking, are my reference tracks using very clean kicks or are they more gritty? And what am I going to use? Now, bonus characteristic, let me show you some of the problems you might see in some kick drums. Here's one here I call the bow tie, and you can spot this even just looking at the audio file, even without something like Vision as well. The problem is this. See how the kick starts off here quite busy with its high frequency attack, then the wave goes down really low, then it comes up again, kind of like a bow tie sort of shape. This kind of wave, it's really representing volume at different frequencies. So the volume is really dropping there, and that's weakening the kick drum. And sometimes we might even be able to see that. Let's have a look on Vision. Yeah, sure enough, see where the volume dips out there? It's got a big hole in the kick drum where it's almost scooped out. Now, interestingly, this happens through layering kick drums. This kick drum would have been poorly layered incorrectly, and there's been some phase cancellation at this point where two kick drums were stuck together, or some kind of poor crossfading. You don't need to deal with that, and now you know how to find it. Whenever you see these bow tie shapes in your kick drums, they're almost always a no-go. All right, here's another one. I like to call this phase wobbles. Now this one you can't see so much from the sample, but you can hear it and feel it, and you can see it on Vision too. See these weak spots popping through here? Again, there's some like phased modulation in something that's happening in the kick drum that's not making an even strength throughout. It's wobbling like that. Now, very rarely this could be kind of cool depending on the song and what you're going for, but I think most of the time, and especially if you want a strong kick, this isn't what you want. Here's another one. I'd say this is kind of a stereo phase problem. It's similar to the last one. And you can see it's got the kind of phase wobbly things going on there too. Crazy weird low end stuff down super low there as well. But you can also see a clue here in Simpler where the waves are not aligned. This is just the left and the right side of the waveform. So it's showing that there's quite a bit of difference there. And when we have difference between the left and the right side, we have stereo. So let's hear this. I've got everything in mono still. Let's hear it in stereo. Sure enough, it's super wide in the low end, and that's often going to cause a bunch of problems for you. So I would be wary of those kind of ones because it's also not just a stereo issue, it's weakening the volume of it because of the phasing between the stereo because it's not well done. All right, now you know what you should be listening for in your kick drums, and you should be comparing that against your reference tracks. Whenever you're not sure about your decision, keep those ears refreshed with the good reference tracks, and then come back and compare them to your kicks and make sure those kind of characteristics are matching up with what you need to get the result you want. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, what about processing? Can't we throw on a whole bunch of compressors and overdrives and whatnots and just change the kick? Well, I explained all this in my last video about why you shouldn't over-process your kick and why most kicks don't need it. But also for the speed and effectiveness of this system, you're much better off just trying to find initially the best sound possible and focusing on that single task first. You want to ideally find a kick that sits in your mix and sounds 80% good already, at least. It's totally possible. There are so many good kicks out there. Sure, there's some bad ones too, but there's so many good ones on Splice and LoopCloud and all those sites, and that don't need any processing at all. So try and start from the best place possible. But if you do need the tiniest bit of processing, the one thing that I might allow is, say, just a touch of EQ. For example, on this kick here, I have this little bit of EQ here. What do I do? Oh, it's only 1 decibel at 524 hertz, but I must have felt I needed it for whatever I was working on. Here's the thing though, if you're gonna do EQ on these, make sure it's within the pad. See how this guy here it's actually inside that pad. If I went to a different pad, it's not there. Now this is great because I can EQ only that kick and not all of the kicks in the rack. Because if I have the EQ outside like this, now when I compare my kick drums, they're all gonna run through this EQ. They're all gonna get colored like this, and they might not all need that adjustment. I don't want them all getting colored and getting weird results. It's like wearing sunglasses at nighttime and wondering why everything is dark. So make sure if you do this EQ stuff and keep it subtle, make sure it is on the actual pad that requires it and nowhere else. And yes, subtle is the name of the game. Don't go in and do a whole bunch of those tiny little resonance cuts that people talk about, just like basic treble, mid-range and low-end kind of stuff. If it needs a lot of EQ adjustments, that's a warning sign straight away that it's a bad kick. Now, once you've gotten rid of all the kicks you don't like and you've found the ones that you do like, very important that you come here and click the save button, save it into your Ableton library so that you can recall it and use it again and again anytime you want. And what I want you to do is in your next song or even in your template, always start with this kick rack that you've made. We want to build upon something. This is your new benchmark because we're never going backwards again. From here on out, your kicks are going to be awesome and they're only going to get better. So if a month or two from now you're working on a song and you can't find a kick in your rack that's working for you, put a new one in. But you have to take one of them out. Find the one that you use the least, delete that one, and start trying some new ones. Trust me, you really do not need more than 16 kick drums, and you shouldn't be wasting your time thinking about more than 16 kick drums when you're trying to write music. Final step for choosing the right kick drum is to be open to new possibilities. Now, I think a great time to do this is just before you start to mix down your track, because really everything else should be done by now. So you've written the song, you've arranged it, you've done all your automation, you're at the point where you're just working on the sonics of it. Now is a great time to say, hey, we've got all the sounds there. Let's see if any other kick in my rack could now actually potentially work even better. Because that way you can compare it against the sounds that are existing and see if it is that perfect piece to complete the puzzle. Sure, some will sound terrible, but occasionally some others will blow your minds. And it's going to be the kind of improvement that you're not going to get from any plugins. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, why should I go to all that effort when I could just hot swap my kick? You could just have one sampler on the track and you can come in, press this sample hot swap button, and you can flick between them like this and load different samples. Sure, that's cool that they have that. There's a couple of problems with that though. For starters, we can't make a collection of kicks. We can't make a palette that way. So that means we can't compare them against each other. We can't make sure we're definitely going in a forwards and positive direction. Also, these samples are all at different levels, so we can't volume match them as we compare them, which is crucial. So I don't recommend the hot swap method. The only way you could do that is if you use the actual plugin preset method, where you save them here and had a whole big list of presets and you volume match them. But I think it's going to get messy. It's just easier to put it in a drum rack. And I bet some of you are thinking, hey, but I use kick too. Isn't a kick synth better than a sample? And wouldn't that be a better way of doing things? Well, I disagree. And here's why. I don't have kick 2 because I don't need it. So I'll just demonstrate with this kick synth here for now because it doesn't really matter which one we use. So here's the problem with kick synths. First up, designing a kick with a synth is much harder than everybody thinks. And anyone really from beginner to intermediate to maybe even advanced is probably going to be better off with samples. That's just the way it is. Part of the reason I don't like it for my system too is that when you're working on just one kick sound on your kick synthesizer, you're going to be turning knobs and trying to get it to fit into your song. And when it doesn't fit, you're going to go back and turn some knobs. And then you're going to ask yourself, what did it sound like 10 variations ago? And you're going to have no idea because you endlessly go down this rabbit hole of just turning knobs. And crucially, you have nothing to compare it to. You don't know what it sounded like an hour ago or yesterday or anything. So you get stuck in this endless tweaking that everybody's trying to avoid. But there is a way around that. If you're adamant about using a kick synth, at least do it this way. Take your kick synth, your kick 2 or whatever you use, and set it to group to drum rack. And then we can use the same system that I was just talking about. You can make your kick sound with your kick 2 here. When you're happy with it, duplicate it. And any settings you change it on the next pad. And just keep duplicating, and each one in your drum rack can have a slight different variation. Like let's change that one there, we'll make it shorter or something. Now, once you've got a drum rack full of your favorite kick synth sounds that you've been making that are all volume matched, right? Then you can fairly compare them against each other in context and see which one's actually working best for your song. There's one more step though that I want you to do. I want you to compare this to samples. I want you to use the same drum rack and pull in some samples too. And try your honest best to beat your kicks that you made with your synthesizer with some samples, because you can probably do it. Because the people that make these kicks are pretty good, these sound designers out there, and it's pretty rare that you can beat their kick drums with one plugin. So pull some of these kick samples in, compare them against your ones you've made with your kick 2 or your kick synth, and if the samples win, you should probably just use the samples. Now, if the kick 2 wins, awesome, go for it. If that's your favorite, if you honestly believe that's sounding the best, that's the one to use as well too. But this will at least let you know for sure that you're definitely getting the best possible kick drum for you, and you can be confident in your decisions. And it will also mean that you have the best kick ever today, and it will only get better in the future. But I'm sure some of you are saying, well, why don't we just layer kicks? We can sound design kicks like that as well too. And anyone that knows me will already know that I don't recommend layering things. And there's many problems, and probably especially with kick drums. We looked at some before where we saw some damaged samples that were even bought from a store and they came that way. They had phasing issues that were canceling out part of the kick. I've got a quick layered kick here that I threw in that looks like the kind of kick that I often see students send me when they're first starting out before they learn this stuff. They'll often have like a top layer, a mid layer, and a low one. and they'll put them all together so they can kind of design a kick drum. Now, you don't really want to waste time designing kick drums for the reason I just explained about the whole Kick 2 synthesizer thing. You're much better off just finding a well-designed sample. And you also don't need to split your kick into 3 parts to get control over the low, mids, and highs. You just use an EQ for that. But let's check out how this sounds in context in this song versus a single sample. There's no comparison. And I'll show you what I mean. Let's check it on the spectrograph thing over here too, spectrogram. So here's our layered kick there. Missing so much punch. Look at all these wobbly bits coming through. Now we could even go into more detail. Let me load up my other preset here to check kick drums. Check this out. This is giving me the waveform of what's coming through. Sure enough, big bow tie happening there. This is what happens very often when you're layering kicks. Let's compare it to the single sample. Much more solid. Sure, there's a tiny dip there, but it's hardly anything in comparison. Let's find some other ones in there to show what I mean. Yeah, this would be an even healthier shape to look for, something that doesn't have any of that dip at all too. But yeah, this is coming from when we're putting this mid kick with the low kick together. Straight away you're getting that problem. So if you are going to be making layered kicks, definitely make sure you're at least doing this and checking the phase of everything as well too, to make sure it's going to be solid and not going to cause you any problems. Make sure it's looking good on a spectrogram, and then incorporate all the methods of comparison by making multiple versions of these so you can have up to 16. I mean, that's just going to be so many tracks though. That's why I don't recommend doing this. It's so hard. It takes up so much time. Now, if you really want to be a kick drum designer more than you want to be a music producer, go for it. But I think most people just want to make music. And I can tell you for a fact that so many of the pros just have one favorite kick and they use it on every song. Maybe they got 3 favorites at the most, but they just pump them out like that. That's why you see those kind of videos where they're like, I'm flying to Tomorrowland and I'm making a song right now in 2 hours, and then they play it and it sounds amazing. It's because they've already picked out their sounds. They've already picked out their great kicks. They spent time doing it. But I know maybe some of you are thinking that you really like putting all your compressors and overdrives and multi-bands and all sorts of shapers and stuff on your kick, and you end up with a chain of like 20 plugins long. And maybe you honestly think that that sounds better and you love that sound. Well, I would have 2 tips for you in this case. If you're going to be doing something like that, make sure whatever plugins you're using, they're set at unity gain, as in whatever volume is coming in is the same going out. So that if you turn this on and off, like if we're adding a bunch of drive here, the output level should be down at a point where when you turn this off, the volume shouldn't change. When we turn it on, we just hear the tonal difference, but we don't hear a volume difference. Same for compression, multiband, even EQ, really. That way you can definitely tell if your plugins are making your kick better and check it in context with your song, or are they just kind of wasting your time and adding too much processing. Secondly, add on top of that, use the comparison method as well. So take all those plugin chains you're doing and put them just on the individual pad. Maybe make some variations. You might realize the sample with just the EQ sounds a lot better than the sample with 20 plugins. And I bet somebody will say, that's all well and good, Stu, but how do I choose good reference tracks? Well, we're kind of running out of time, but if you would like me to make a video about how to choose good reference tracks, let me know down below. Or maybe you're thinking, well, hey, I do hip hop or dubstep or drum and bass, and this doesn't apply to me. Well, actually, it's still the same thing. You can use this formula too. Just pick good reference tracks, try your kick drums in context, know what you're aiming for, listen to those characteristics, and it's going to get you closer and closer to what you want until it's exactly right. Now, I've been sharing all these kick drum tips here today because I want to help you get through what is some of the most difficult part of the sonic creation and music production journey for all of us. I know it wastes so much time, so much frustration, and it affects your results so much. So hopefully these things help out, but I do have one more tip. And that's to delve into your mixdown process and learn more about it as much as possible. This is going to set you up with a good foundation, but there's so much more to talk about that I can't explain in this one video. And that's why I made my new advanced mixdown course, Pro Sound Secrets. It's coming up this October 24. We're launching it then, but there's only going to be 10 places available. So if you want to learn more about it, head to bassclef.com/PSS or click the link below, and you can join the priority waitlist there to be first notified when we open enrollment.